I'm Rebecca Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old. My stepmother just asked why I was at my own father's funeral. The words hit me like a slap across the face as I stood beside his casket, wearing the black dress I'd bought specifically for this moment I'd been dreading for months. I kept my expression perfectly calm, though my hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the white roses I'd placed on Dad's casket. Instead of answering Diane's question, I simply nodded to the funeral director and took my seat in the front row, the seat I'd reserved for myself as his eldest daughter. That simple action set off a chain of whispers and uncomfortable glances that would change everything. But I had no idea what was coming next. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how this whole mess started. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work at my marketing job in downtown Phoenix. Unknown number, which I almost didn't answer. Thank God I did. Miss Mitchell? This is St. Joseph's Hospital. Your father, Robert Mitchell, was brought in this morning following a heart attack. The world stopped. Dad was only 62, still running his construction company, still playing weekend golf. Heart attacks happen to other people's fathers, not mine. I drove to the hospital in a daze, my mind racing through all the things I should have said, should have done. When I arrived, Diane was already there with Tyler and Madison, my half-siblings. They formed a tight circle in the waiting room, and I noticed immediately that there wasn't space for me to join them. How is he? I asked, approaching cautiously. Diane barely looked up. Critical condition. They're doing everything they can. Her tone was clipped, professional, like she was speaking to a distant acquaintance rather than her husband's daughter. Tyler, 22 and perpetually glued to his phone, didn't acknowledge me at all. Madison, 19 and away from college for the emergency, gave me a brief nod before returning to her conversation with her mother. I stood there for a moment, unsure where I belonged in this family portrait of grief. Finally, I took a seat across from them, close enough to hear updates, but far enough to avoid intruding on their space. It was a dance I'd been performing for 12 years, ever since Dad married Diane when I was 16. The hours crawled by. Doctors came and went with updates that grew increasingly grim. Dad had suffered massive heart damage. Even if he survived, the recovery would be long and uncertain. I watched my stepfamily process this information as a unit, sharing comfort and making decisions together. When Dad briefly regained consciousness around midnight, I was the last one allowed to see him. By then, he was heavily sedated and barely coherent. Becca, he whispered, using the childhood nickname that always made me feel like Daddy's little girl again. Promise me something. Anything, Dad. Don't let anyone tell you. His voice faded as the medication pulled him back under. Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me. He died 3 hours later, with Diane holding one hand and me holding the other. In that moment, grief made us equal. But it wouldn't last long. The funeral arrangements revealed just how little input I was expected to have in my father's final goodbye. Diane had already selected the funeral home, planned the service, and written the obituary by the time I arrived at their house the next morning. My name was mentioned once, as survived by daughter Rebecca, after 2 paragraphs dedicated to Tyler and Madison's accomplishments. I thought you might want to add something about Dad's business, I suggested carefully, or maybe mention his volunteer work with Habitat for Humanity. Diane looked at me like I'd suggested dancing on his grave. The obituary is already submitted, Rebecca. We can't make changes now. That was a lie, and we both knew it. But it set the tone for everything that followed. The church was packed for Dad's funeral service. Robert Mitchell had been well-loved in our community, and it showed in the sea of faces that filled every pew. I recognized many of them. Dad's business partners, golf buddies, neighbors we'd known for years. Some even approached me with warm hugs and fond memories of how proud Dad always was of me. But if you didn't know better, you might have thought Robert Mitchell only had 2 children. Diane had positioned herself and her kids in the receiving line, graciously accepting condolences while I stood awkwardly to the side. When people specifically sought me out, Diane's smile never wavered, but I could feel her irritation like heat radiating from a stove. Rebecca, sweetie, Mrs. Henderson from next door grabbed my hands warmly. Your father talked about you constantly. He was so proud of how well you've done for yourself. Before I could respond, Diane smoothly interjected, We're all so proud of our children. Tyler just got promoted at his internship and Madison made Dean's List again. The conversation shifted, as Diane intended. It was masterful, really. The way she could redirect any praise meant for me toward her own children without seeming rude. She'd perfected this technique over 12 years of marriage to my father. I thought back to the day I first met Diane, just 2 years after Mom died. I was 16, still raw with grief, when Dad brought home this polished woman with her perfect blonde hair and her 2 young children. "Kids, I want you to meet someone very special," Dad had said nervously, his hands fidgeting with his car keys. "This is Diane, and these are her children, Tyler and Madison." Tyler was 10 then, a sullen kid who clung to his mother's side and glared at me like I was personally responsible for his parents' divorce. Madison was only 7, sweet and shy, hiding behind her brother. They seemed impossibly young and fragile compared to my teenage awkwardness. Diane had smiled at me with what I later learned was her signature move, warm on the surface, calculating underneath. "Rebecca, your father has told me so much about you. I hope we can be friends." I wanted to hate her immediately, but Dad looked so hopeful, so desperate for this to work. He'd been lonely since Mom died, and I could see how much Diane's attention meant to him. So I swallowed my resentment and tried to be welcoming. "It's nice to meet you," I'd lied, shaking her perfectly manicured hand. The early days of their relationship were actually easier than what came later. Diane was on her best behavior, and Dad was head over heels in love. She'd include me in outings with her kids, compliment my grades, and even ask my opinion on wedding plans. But I should have paid more attention to the small moments. The way she'd forget to set a place for me at dinner parties, how she'd schedule family photos when I was at my part-time job, the subtle corrections when Dad praised my achievements in front of her friends. "Rebecca does well in school," she'd say, "though it's so much harder now than when we were young. The standards are really quite different." Dad never noticed these little digs. He was too busy being grateful that his new wife was making an effort with his difficult teenage daughter. And I was too young to understand that this was just the beginning. The wedding was small but elegant, held in the garden of Dad's house, the house where I'd lived my entire life until that point. I served as a bridesmaid, wearing a pale yellow dress that washed out my complexion, while Tyler served as ring bearer, and Madison scattered rose petals as flower girl. In the wedding photos, you can see the exact moment our family dynamic shifted. Dad and Diane in the center, radiant and happy. Tyler and Madison flanking them like perfect bookends. And me, slightly off to the side, smiling, but somehow separate from the rest of the group. That night, after the guests had gone home and the caterers had cleaned up, I found Dad sitting alone on the back porch where we used to have our best conversations. "Happy wedding day, Dad," I said, settling into the chair beside him. He pulled me into a hug that smelled like his cologne and wedding cake. "I know this is a big change, sweetheart, but you're going to love having siblings. And Diane? She's going to be such a wonderful addition to our family." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But even then, I had a sinking feeling that our family of 2 had just become her family of 4, plus 1. The transition into being a blended family happened gradually, like watching water slowly rise in a bathtub. At first, everything seemed manageable. Then suddenly you realize you're drowning. Diane moved into our house with Tyler and Madison, and suddenly every tradition Dad and I had shared was up for negotiation. Sunday morning pancakes became elaborate brunches that took hours to prepare. Our quiet movie nights turned into family game nights that somehow always featured activities Tyler and Madison excelled at. When I brought home my acceptance letter to Arizona State University, I was bursting with pride. ASU had offered me a partial scholarship for journalism, and I'd worked 2 part-time jobs to save money for the rest of my expenses. "Dad, look!" I practically bounced into the kitchen where he was helping Madison with her homework. "I got into ASU with scholarship money." Dad's face lit up with genuine pride. "Rebecca, that's incredible. We need to celebrate this." But before he could say more, Diane appeared from the laundry room, her expression carefully neutral. "That's wonderful, honey. Of course, ASU isn't really considered a top-tier school, is it? But I'm sure you'll do fine there." The comment hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Dad frowned slightly but didn't contradict her. Madison looked up from her math problems with confusion. "What's ASU?" she asked innocently. "It's where Rebecca is going to college," Dad explained, his enthusiasm noticeably dampened. "Oh," Madison said, losing interest immediately. "Mom, can you help me with this problem?" Just like that, my moment was over. Diane swooped in to help Madison while Dad quietly returned to reviewing work invoices. My acceptance letter sat on the counter, suddenly feeling less like a victory and more like an awkward interruption. This became the pattern for the next 2 years. Every achievement of mine was met with qualified praise. Every celebration was somehow shared or overshadowed. When I won a writing contest my senior year, Diane mentioned it in the same breath as Tyler making JV soccer. When I graduated as salutatorian, she spent the car ride home discussing Madison's upcoming piano recital. Dad loved me. I never doubted that. But he also loved his new family, and keeping peace in the house meant not making waves. Diane was careful never to be openly cruel or dismissive when he was paying attention. She was too smart for that. The real moments of conflict happened when Dad wasn't around to witness them. Like the time I came home from my job at the local newspaper to find Tyler wearing my ASU sweatshirt, the one I'd bought with my own money to show school spirit. "Tyler, that's mine," I said, trying to keep my voice level. He shrugged. "Mom said I could borrow it. It's just a shirt." I found Diane in the laundry room, folding towels with meticulous precision. "Diane, could you ask Tyler not to wear my things without permission?" She looked at me with surprise that seemed genuine. "Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was so special to you. It was just sitting in the clean laundry and Tyler needed something warm. I thought you wouldn't mind sharing with your brother." The word brother always felt forced when she said it, like she was reading from a script. But the real genius of her response was how it made me seem petty for caring about a sweatshirt. After all, shouldn't family members share? "It's fine," I said, because what else could I say? "Just ask next time?" "Of course," she smiled. "We're all still learning how to live together, aren't we?" These small erosions of my place in the family continued through my college years. When I came home for holidays, I'd find Tyler had moved into my childhood bedroom because his room was being used for Diane's home office. When I called Dad, Diane would chat briefly with me before handing him the phone, effectively controlling the conversation. The worst part was how Dad seemed oblivious to it all. In his mind, we were one big happy family working through normal adjustment issues. He'd beam with pride when Diane included me in family photos or mentioned my accomplishments to friends. He never saw the careful orchestration behind her gestures. "You're so lucky to have Diane," he told me once during my junior year. "She really goes out of her way to make you feel included." I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Maybe both. Instead, I nodded and agreed. Because what was the alternative? Telling Dad that his wife's kindness was performative would only hurt him and change nothing. But there were moments when Dad's protection of me shone through. Moments that kept me holding on to hope that our bond was stronger than Diane's subtle manipulations. Like the time Diane suggested I shouldn't come home for Tyler's high school graduation because it would be too crowded with extended family visiting. Dad shut that down immediately. "Rebecca is family," he said firmly. "She'll be there." Or when Diane forgot to include me in the family Christmas card photo and Dad made them retake it. "My daughter belongs in this picture," he'd said, wrapping his arm around me. These moments reminded me that despite everything, I was still his daughter. He still loved me. He still chose me, even when it would have been easier not to. But now he was gone, and I was about to discover just how much his protection had meant. The actual funeral service was beautiful, exactly what Dad would have wanted. Pastor Williams spoke about Dad's generous spirit and his commitment to family. The eulogies painted a picture of a man who'd built a successful business while never forgetting his roots or his responsibilities to others. I'd prepared my own eulogy, 3 pages of memories about the man who'd taught me to drive, helped me with math homework, and always believed I could do anything I set my mind to. But when the pastor asked if any family members wanted to speak, Diane smoothly stepped forward. "The children and I would like to say a few words," she announced, gesturing to Tyler and Madison. The children. Not our children or Robert's children, just the children. The exclusion was subtle but unmistakable. I sat in the front pew, my prepared speech folded in my purse, and listened as Tyler spoke about Dad teaching him to use power tools, and Madison tearfully recalled Dad's patience helping her learn to ride a bike. Their memories were genuine and touching, and I found myself crying not just for Dad, but for all the shared moments I'd never get to have with him again. As we filed out of the church, several people approached me with condolences and questions about the burial service. That's when I learned that the graveside ceremony was family only, a distinction I apparently didn't qualify for. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked Mrs. Patterson from Dad's office. "Family only? That's what Diane told us," she replied, looking confused. "She said you'd understand." I looked around for Diane and found her near the church entrance, accepting sympathy cards and organizing the logistics for people who wanted to attend the burial. When our eyes met across the crowded church steps, she gave me a small, apologetic shrug. "Rebecca, sweetheart," she approached me with her signature concerned expression. "I know this is difficult, but the cemetery has very limited space, and with Robert's brothers coming in from out of state, his brothers who I haven't seen in 10 years? I asked quietly. "Family is family," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm sure you understand. You can join us for the reception afterward." The reception. At Dad's house, my childhood home, where I'd need permission to enter my own father's wake. I stood on those church steps, watching my father's casket being loaded into the hearse that would carry him to his final resting place without me, and felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Grief was still there, overwhelming and raw, but alongside it grew something else. A cold, clarifying anger. "Rebecca," a voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see an elderly man in an expensive suit approaching me with purpose. "I'm Harold Henderson, your father's attorney. I was wondering if we could speak privately for a moment." Diane, who had been watching this interaction from across the parking lot, suddenly appeared at my side. "Mr. Henderson, how thoughtful of you to come. We'll be in touch about the estate matters once we've had time to grieve properly." The lawyer's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught something in his eyes, a flicker of disapproval at Diane's presumption. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, I need to speak with all of Robert's children today. I have some urgent matters to discuss regarding his final wishes." "Surely it can wait a few days," Diane pressed, her smile looking increasingly strained. "Today is for saying goodbye." "I'm afraid not," Mr. Henderson said firmly. "Robert was very specific about the timing. I'll need to see Rebecca, Tyler, and Madison at my office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. All three of them." I watched Diane's face carefully. For just a moment, her composed mask slipped, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "Of course," she recovered quickly. "We'll all be there." But Mr. Henderson was looking directly at me now. "Miss Mitchell, it's crucial that you attend personally. Your father left very specific instructions regarding your inheritance." The word inheritance hung in the air like a thunderclap. Diane's smile froze completely. "I'll be there," I said, meeting the lawyer's eyes steadily. As he walked away, I felt Diane studying my face with new intensity. For 12 years, she'd seen me as a manageable inconvenience, easily sidelined and controlled. But now there was something in her expression I'd never seen before, genuine concern about what I might represent. "Rebecca," she said carefully, "I hope you don't have any unrealistic expectations about your father's estate. Robert and I discussed everything thoroughly, and most of his assets are tied up in our home and the children's college funds." Her preemptive explanation only confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. Dad had left me something significant enough that Diane felt the need to manage my expectations in advance. "I'm not expecting anything," I replied honestly. "Dad gave me everything I needed while he was alive." But even as I said the words, I wondered if that was entirely true. Maybe Dad had one final gift waiting for me, something Diane couldn't orchestrate or control. The burial proceeded without me, as planned. I drove home to my apartment, still wearing my funeral dress, and sat in my kitchen wondering what tomorrow would bring. For the first time since Dad died, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd found a way to protect me even after he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dad's last words to me in the hospital. "Don't let them. Don't let anyone tell you." Tell me what? What had he been trying to warn me about? Tomorrow, I would find out. Henderson's law office was exactly what you'd expect from a successful small-town attorney. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the faint smell of expensive coffee. I arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, wearing my best interview suit and carrying a notebook, though I had no idea what I might need to write down. Diane was already there with Tyler and Madison, occupying the chairs closest to Mr. Henderson's desk like they were claiming territory. Tyler looked hungover and annoyed at being dragged out of bed, while Madison seemed nervous, fidgeting with her purse strap. "Rebecca, good morning." Mr. Henderson stood as I entered. "Please, have a seat. We have quite a bit to cover today." I took the remaining chair, which happened to be directly across from Diane. She gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Before we begin, Mr. Henderson said, settling behind his desk with a thick folder, "I want you all to know that your father spent considerable time updating his will over the past 6 months. He was very thoughtful about his final wishes and very specific about how he wanted his estate distributed." Diane shifted in her chair. "We understand Robert wanted to provide for everyone. He was always so generous." "Indeed he was," the lawyer agreed, opening the folder. "Let me start with the household effects and personal items. Most of Robert's clothing and personal belongings will go to his wife, as is customary. However, he specifically requested that his watch collection, his golf clubs, and his photo albums be given to Rebecca." I felt tears spring to my eyes unexpectedly. Dad's watches had been his pride and joy, vintage pieces he'd collected over decades. I used to sit with him on Saturday mornings while he cleaned and wound them, listening to him explain their histories. "That's lovely," Diane said, though her voice was strained. "Those old watches need so much maintenance. I'm sure Rebecca will enjoy taking care of them." Mr. Henderson continued. "Now, regarding the house at Oak Street, currently valued at approximately I braced myself. Of course the house would go to Diane. She'd lived there for 12 years, raised her children there. It only made sense. Robert has left the house to Rebecca, along with all of its contents. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Madison gasped audibly. Tyler's phone clattered to the floor. And Diane went completely white. I'm sorry, she said slowly. Could you repeat that? The house goes to Rebecca, Mr. Henderson said patiently. Robert felt it was important that his daughter inherit the family home where she grew up. But where are we supposed to live? Madison's voice was small and panicked. That's our home, too. I felt sick. This wasn't what I wanted. I didn't need Dad's house, I just needed him to still be alive. There's more, Mr. Henderson continued. Robert's business, Mitchell Construction, along with all its assets, equipment, and current contracts, is also being transferred to Rebecca. The business has been valued at approximately $1 million. Diane stood up abruptly. This is impossible. Robert would never leave us with nothing. He loved Tyler and Madison like his own children. Please sit down, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm not finished. The lawyer's voice was firm. Robert was very aware of his responsibilities to his minor children. Tyler and Madison will each receive dollars for college expenses to be held in trust until they turn 21. Additionally, Diane, you will receive $dollars and a life insurance payout of $. That's not enough. Diane's voice was barely a whisper. How are we supposed to survive on that? The house payments alone are $, a month. Mr. Henderson looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Robert assumed the house would no longer have mortgage payments, since he'd paid it off completely last year. However, I understand you refinanced the property 6 months ago? The silence that followed was deafening. Diane sank back into her chair, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. Shock, fear, and something that looked almost like guilt. Why don't we talk about the specific terms? Mr. Henderson continued. Rebecca, your father was very clear that you should take possession of the house and business immediately. However, he also wanted to ensure that Tyler and Madison could finish their school year without disruption. I found my voice for the first time since entering the office. Of course, I wouldn't dream of forcing them to move before graduation. Additionally, the lawyer said, Robert hoped you might consider offering Diane temporary residence in the house while she makes other arrangements. He suggested 3 months would be appropriate. 3 months. I looked across at Diane, who was staring at her hands in her lap. The woman who had spent 12 years making me feel like an outsider in my own home was now going to be my house guest. That's generous, I said carefully. We can discuss the details. But Tyler was apparently done listening. This is bullshit, he said, standing up abruptly. Why does she get everything? She hasn't even lived there in 10 years. Tyler, Diane warned quietly. No, Mom, this isn't fair. Dad always said we were his kids too. He always said we were all equal. He turned to me with undisguised hostility. You probably manipulated him somehow. You probably convinced him to change his will. That's enough. Mr. Henderson's voice cut through the room like a whip. I will not tolerate accusations in my office. Your stepfather's will was written with full legal consultation and witnessed appropriately. There was no manipulation involved. Madison was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. I don't understand. Why didn't Daddy love us enough? And there it was. The question that was breaking my heart too. Because despite everything, despite Diane's years of subtle exclusion and manipulation, I had genuinely cared about Tyler and Madison. They were innocent kids caught in an adult situation they didn't create. He did love you, I said softly. This isn't about love. This is about... I paused, trying to find words that were honest but not cruel. This is about family legacy. The house has been in Dad's family for 40 years. The business has his name on it. It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. There was something else here. Something in the deliberate way Dad had structured this inheritance that felt like a message. But what was he trying to tell me? As we left the lawyer's office, I realized my life had just changed completely. I was now a business owner, a homeowner, and responsible for somehow managing a family situation that had just exploded into a million pieces. But more than that, I was beginning to understand that Dad's final gift wasn't just an inheritance. It was freedom, and the power to finally set the terms of my own relationships with these people who had never quite accepted me as family. The drive back to Dad's house, my house now, I had to keep reminding myself, was surreal. I followed Diane's car through neighborhoods I'd known since childhood, past the elementary school where I'd learned to read and the park where Dad taught me to throw a curveball. Everything looked exactly the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. When we pulled into the driveway, I sat in my car for a moment, staring at the red brick ranch house with its white shutters and the oak tree Dad had planted when I was 8. 3 months ago, this had been a place I visited awkwardly during holidays. Now it was mine, and I had no idea what that meant. Diane waited for me by the front door, her keys in her hand. For a moment, we both stood there in awkward silence. "I suppose you'll want these," she said finally, offering me the keys with stiff formality. "Keep them for now," I said. "We need to figure out how this is going to work." Inside, the house felt different immediately. Maybe it was knowing I now owned every piece of furniture, every family photo, every coffee cup in the cabinet, or maybe it was the way Diane moved through the rooms with newfound uncertainty, no longer the mistress of her domain. Tyler had disappeared immediately to his room, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. Madison hovered in the living room, looking lost and fragile. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "are you going to kick us out?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. Despite everything, Madison had always been kind to him. She was just a kid who'd lost the only father she'd ever known, and now her world was falling apart. "No, sweetie," I said, sitting down beside her on Dad's old recliner. "Your mom is right that we need to figure out living arrangements, but nobody's getting kicked out. This is your home, too." She looked at me with those big eyes that reminded me so much of Tyler at that age, before adolescence and Diane's influence had turned him against me. "Mom says you hate us," she whispered. I glanced at Diane, who was standing in the kitchen doorway, her face carefully neutral. Of course she'd said that. Of course she'd poisoned the well in advance. "I don't hate you, Madison," I said honestly. "I've never hated any of you. Sometimes families are complicated, but that doesn't mean we don't care about each other." Diane moved closer, her expression calculating. "Rebecca, I think we need to discuss the practical matters. The mortgage payment, utilities, property taxes, they're all due within the next few weeks." I looked at her carefully. "I thought Dad paid off the house last year." Her face flushed slightly. "Well, yes, but we refinanced to help with some unexpected expenses. Tyler's college prep courses, Madison's piano lessons, some medical bills. Medical bills. I made a mental note to ask Mr. Henderson about that later. "How much is the monthly payment?" I asked. $2,800, she said, watching my face for a reaction. I did the math quickly. Even with my marketing salary, that was more than I could afford long-term, especially with a business to run and property taxes to pay. Dad had left me assets, but I was going to need time to figure out how to make them profitable. "Okay," I said slowly. "Here's what I propose. You can stay in the house rent-free for 3 months like Dad suggested, but I'll need you to cover utilities and groceries during that time. That gives us all time to adjust and make plans." Relief flooded Diane's face. "That's very generous. After 3 months, we'll reassess. Maybe you'll have found another place by then, or maybe we'll work out a different arrangement." What I didn't say was that 3 months would also give me time to understand what I'd inherited and why Dad had structured things the way he had. There were too many questions, too many pieces that didn't quite fit. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Diane. "When Dad was in the hospital, he started to tell me something. He said, 'Don't let them tell you.' And then he couldn't finish. Do you know what he might have meant?" Diane's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something that was gone too quickly for me to identify. "I have no idea," she said. "He was heavily medicated. It could have been anything." But something in her tone suggested otherwise. Something in the way she avoided my eyes told me that Dad's unfinished warning had been very specific indeed. That evening, after Tyler and Madison had gone to their rooms and Diane had retreated to what used to be her master bedroom, I sat alone in Dad's study. His desk was exactly as he'd left it. Legal pads covered with notes about upcoming construction projects, his reading glasses folded beside his computer, a coffee mug with his company logo that still held the faint ring of his last cup. I opened the desk drawers one by one, not really sure what I was looking for. In the bottom drawer, I found a manila folder labeled "Rebecca Important" in Dad's familiar handwriting. Inside were copies of documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements showing regular transfers of money to an account I didn't recognize. Insurance policies I didn't know existed. And most intriguingly, a series of printed emails between Dad and someone named David Morrison at Morrison Investigations. The emails were dated from the past 6 months, and their subject line made my blood run cold. Background check, Diane Mitchell. Dad had been investigating his own wife, and based on the final email in the stack, dated just 2 weeks before his death, he'd discovered something that changed everything. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the folder, slipping it into my purse. Whatever Dad had learned about Diane, whatever he'd been trying to warn me about in the hospital, I was going to find out. But first, I needed to understand exactly what kind of game I'd just inherited, and what rules Diane had been playing by all these years. Tomorrow I would call David Morrison. Call David. Tonight I would sleep in my childhood bedroom and try to process the fact that my entire life had just shifted on its axis. One thing was becoming clear, though. Dad's inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about truth. And after 12 years of being the outsider in my own family, I was finally going to learn what had really been going on behind all those perfect smiles and careful manipulations. Have you ever inherited more than you bargained for? Sometimes the most valuable legacy isn't what's in the will. It's what you discover afterward. The next morning, I called David Morrison before I lost my nerve. His voice was gravelly, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a private investigator. "Miss Mitchell," he said when I identified myself, "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Your father said you might call after Mr. Morrison, I found emails between you and my dad. He was investigating Diane." "He was, and what I found—" He paused. "This isn't something we should discuss over the phone. Can you meet me this afternoon? There's a lot you need to know." We arranged to meet at a diner across town, far from any chance of running into Diane or her kids. I spent the morning at Mitchell Construction, meeting with Dad's foreman, Jim Rodriguez, and trying to understand what I'd inherited. "Your dad was a good man," Jim told me as we walked through the current job sites. "Honest, fair, paid his bills on time. But the last few months he seemed worried about something. Kept asking me to document everything. Make sure all the paperwork was in order. Worried how? Like he thought someone might be checking up on him, or maybe checking up on someone else." Jim gave me a meaningful look, if you know what I mean. I was beginning to understand that Dad's investigation into Diane hadn't been subtle. People had noticed his changed behavior, his sudden attention to documentation and legal details. At 2 o'clock, I sat across from David Morrison in a vinyl booth that had seen better decades. He was exactly what Central Casting would order for a private investigator. Mid-50s, gray hair, tired eyes that had seen too much. "Your father hired me 6 months ago," he began without preamble. "Said he had concerns about his wife's financial activities. Turned out his instincts were right." He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "Diane Mitchell has been systematically stealing from your father for 3 years. Credit cards opened in his name, loans taken against the business, money transferred from his accounts to accounts she controls." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Bank statements, credit reports, loan documents, all bearing Dad's name, but none authorized by him. "How much?" I whispered. "Close to $400,000, maybe more. She's good at covering her tracks, but not good enough." I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. "But why? Dad always made sure she had everything she needed." Morrison shrugged. "Some people are never satisfied. Or maybe she was planning her exit strategy. Either way, your father figured it out when he tried to pay off the house last year and discovered it had been refinanced without his knowledge." "Did he confront her?" "Not directly. He was smart about it, started changing passwords, moving money to accounts she couldn't access, updating his will. He wanted all his ducks in a row before he made any accusations. And then he died. Heart attack brought on by stress, according to his cardiologist. Your father had been dealing with high blood pressure for months, ever since he discovered Diane's activities. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Diane's theft had literally contributed to Dad's death. "There's more," Morrison continued. "The medical bills she claimed caused the refinancing? Those were for Tyler's rehab. Kid has a serious gambling problem, racked up debts with some dangerous people. Diane paid them off using your father's money." Everything clicked into place. The way Diane had managed every aspect of Dad's financial life, the way she'd isolated me from family business discussions, the careful control of information and access. "What should I do with this?" I asked, gesturing to the evidence. "That's up to you. You've got enough here for criminal charges if you want to pursue them. Or you could use it as leverage to get your father's money back." I thought about Tyler and Madison, about the mess they'd inherit if their mother went to prison. I thought about Dad, who'd spent his final months stressed and heartbroken over his wife's betrayal. "I need time to think about this." "Take all the time you need." "But Miss Mitchell, your father's last request was that I make sure you got this information. He wanted you to know the truth about what you were dealing with." That evening, I sat in Dad's study with Morrison's evidence spread across the desk. Every document told the same story. Years of calculated deception and theft by a woman Dad had trusted completely. But there was something else in the papers that caught my attention. A bank account I'd never seen before, opened 3 months ago in my name with a substantial balance. I called Morrison immediately. "There's an account here with my name on it. I never opened this." "Your father did. He'd been moving money there for months, trying to protect it from Diane's access. That's your real inheritance, Miss Mitchell. About $600,000 that she never knew existed. $600,000. More than enough to pay off the house, run the business, and secure my future. Dad had been 3 steps ahead of everyone, protecting me even while his own world was falling apart. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I have a feeling you're going to be surprised by how this all unfolds. Armed with the truth about Diane's theft, I had decisions to make. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. The next morning, I drove to Dad's bank and met with his personal banker, Margaret Chen. She'd handled Dad's accounts for 15 years and knew him well. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, settling behind her desk with a thick file. "Your father was one of our most valued customers. Mrs. Chen, I need to understand Dad's financial situation. I've discovered some irregularities." Her expression shifted to concern. "What kind of irregularities?" I showed her Morrison's documentation. As she reviewed the evidence, her face grew increasingly grim. "This is exactly what your father suspected," she said finally. "About 4 months ago, he came in asking us to track unusual activity on his accounts. We helped him identify several unauthorized transactions. Did you report it? Your father asked us not to, said he wanted to handle it privately, but he did take steps to protect his assets." She opened her computer. "He moved substantial funds to an account with only your name on it. He also set up automatic transfers from his business accounts to ensure ongoing protection. I learned that Dad had been even more thorough than I'd realized. Not only had he hidden money from Diane, he'd also restructured his business to limit her access to company funds. There's something else," Mrs. Chen continued. "Your father left instructions for us to present you with this safety deposit box key after his death. The box contained more evidence of Diane's theft, but also something unexpected. A video recording Dad had made just weeks before his death. I watched it that evening in the privacy of my apartment. Dad looked tired but determined as he spoke directly to the camera. Rebecca, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and you've discovered what Diane has been doing. I need you to know that none of this is your fault, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you better from her manipulation over the years." Tears blurred my vision as Dad continued. "I should have seen what she was doing to our family dynamic. I should have recognized how she was pushing you out while pretending to include you. I failed you as a father, and I'm hoping this inheritance can give you the power to set things right." He leaned closer to the camera. "Use this information however you think is best. But don't let her continue hurting people. Tyler and Madison deserve better than a mother who teaches them that stealing and manipulation are acceptable." The video ended with Dad's final message. "I love you, sweetheart. You've always been stronger than you knew." I cried until my chest ached, grieving not just for Dad, but for all the years we'd lost to Diane's careful orchestration of our family dynamics. But then I dried my tears and started planning. The first step was taking full control of the construction business. I spent the next week meeting with employees, reviewing contracts, and learning how Dad had built his company from the ground up. "Your father was proud of this business," Jim Rodriguez told me during our final walkthrough. "But more than that, he was proud of you. Last few months, all he talked about was how smart you were, how you'd be able to handle anything." "Did he say anything specific about the company's future?" Jim smiled. "He said you'd probably modernize everything, bring it into the 21st century. Said that's exactly what it needed." I spent evenings studying business management articles and construction industry reports. Dad had built a solid foundation, but there were opportunities for growth. Digital marketing for residential clients, partnerships with local architects, expansion into sustainable building practices. Within 2 weeks, I'd implemented new project management software and hired a part-time bookkeeper to help with the financial complexity I'd inherited. The business wasn't just surviving the transition, it was thriving. But the real test came when I got home each evening to the house I now shared with Diane and her children. The dynamic had shifted completely. Diane moved through the rooms with careful politeness, no longer the confident matriarch, but a woman walking on eggshells. She offered to cook dinner, cleaned meticulously, and avoided any topic that might cause conflict. Tyler remained hostile but had stopped his open confrontations. Madison was warming up to me, especially after I helped her with a science project and took her shopping for new clothes when Diane claimed they couldn't afford it. "Rebecca," Madison said one evening as we worked on her homework together, "Mom says we might have to move soon. What do you think about that?" She shrugged. "I like it here. This is the only home I remember, but Mom says you probably want your privacy." I looked at this sweet girl who'd been caught in the middle of adult drama she didn't understand. "Madison, Nobody's making any hasty decisions about moving. We're all still figuring things out. But privately, I knew the current arrangement couldn't last forever. Diane's presence in the house felt increasingly strained, and I could sense her growing desperation as her 3-month timeline approached. The breakthrough came when I discovered Tyler trying to hack into Dad's old computer. "Looking for something specific?" I asked from the doorway of Dad's study. He spun around, face flushed with guilt. I wanted to see if there were any pictures of me and Dad. Mom deleted everything from her phone. It was the first time Tyler had mentioned Dad with genuine emotion rather than anger about the inheritance. I sat down beside him. "Your dad loved you, Tyler. The inheritance isn't about love. It's about responsibility and family legacy. Then why didn't he leave me the business? I could have learned to run it." I studied his face, seeing past the bravado to the hurt underneath. "Can I ask you something? What do you know about the debts your mom paid off using Dad's money?" His expression shifted to wariness. "What debts?" So he didn't know. Diane had kept Tyler in the dark about his gambling problem's impact on the family finances. This was my opportunity to begin unraveling Diane's web of lies, not with accusations, but with truth delivered with compassion. 2.5 months into our cohabitation arrangement, I knew it was time to have the conversation I'd been dreading. But first, I needed one more piece of information. I arranged to meet with Mr. Henderson again, this time armed with all of Morrison's evidence and my growing understanding of Dad's true financial situation. "I need to know what my legal options are," I told him, spreading the theft documentation across his desk. He reviewed everything with the thoroughness that had made him Dad's trusted advisor for 20 years. "You have multiple options," he said finally. "Criminal prosecution for fraud and theft, civil litigation to recover the stolen funds, or..." He paused. "You could use this information to negotiate a settlement that protects your interests while avoiding public scandal. What would Dad have wanted? Your father was primarily concerned with protecting you and ensuring Tyler and Madison weren't permanently damaged by their mother's choices. He believed Diane could be held accountable without destroying her children's futures." That evening, I asked Diane to meet me in Dad's study after Tyler and Madison had gone to bed. She entered the room cautiously, as if sensing this conversation would be different from our careful politeness of recent weeks. "Diane, we need to discuss your living arrangements after next month," I began. Relief flooded her face. "Of course. I've been looking at apartments, but with the kids' school situation, before we talk about the future, we need to address the past." I opened Morrison's file. "I know about the theft, Diane. All of it." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She sank into the chair across from Dad's desk, her hands trembling. "I don't know what you think you know, but $400,000. I kept my voice level. Credit cards, loans, refinancing the house, all using Dad's identity without his permission." The silence stretched between us. When Diane finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He never noticed before. He trusted me to handle the finances, and things got complicated." "Tyler's gambling debts?" She nodded miserably. "Those people he owed money to, they were threatening him. I couldn't let anything happen to my son." I felt a flicker of sympathy despite everything. Whatever Diane's faults, her love for her children was genuine. "Dad knew," I continued. "He'd been investigating for months before he died. The stress from discovering your betrayal contributed to his heart attack." Diane's face crumpled. "I never meant I was going to pay it all back. I had a plan." "What plan?" She looked up at me with desperate honesty. "The life insurance money. I was going to use it to cover everything, make it right. But then the will reading happened, and I realized..." "You realized Dad had outsmarted you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know you have every right to have me arrested. I know I destroyed your family and caused Robert's death. But please, please don't punish Tyler and Madison for my mistakes." There it was. The moment I'd been building toward for months. Diane was completely vulnerable, completely at my mercy. I could destroy her life with a single phone call to the police. Instead, I surprised us both. "I'm not going to have you arrested, Diane. But we are going to settle this, and you're going to follow my terms, exactly." Hope flickered in her eyes. "Anything. Whatever you want." I pulled out a contract I'd had Mr. Henderson prepare. "You're going to sign over any claim to Dad's estate beyond what the will specified. You're going to repay the stolen money through a structured plan. And you're going to move out of this house within 30 days. She read through the document with growing relief. The repayment plan was aggressive but manageable, especially with the life insurance money she'd receive. "There's one more thing," I continued. "Tyler needs real help for his gambling addiction. I've arranged for him to start counseling with a specialist who deals with young adults. If he refuses treatment or relapses, our agreement is void. He'll do it, Diane said quickly. I'll make sure he understands. No, Diane. You won't make him do anything anymore. He's going to choose recovery because he wants it, not because you manipulated him into it. She flinched at the word manipulated, but nodded agreement. Where will we live? I found you a nice 3-bedroom rental across town. First month's rent is paid, security deposit covered. After that, you're on your own. I slid another document across the desk. I'm also offering you a job. Her eyes widened in shock. A job? Administrative assistant at Mitchell Construction. $25 an hour, health benefits, 2 weeks vacation. You'll report directly to me. I don't understand. Why would you? Because Tyler and Madison need stability. Because you have skills that could benefit the business. And because Dad believed in second chances for people who earned them. Diane stared at the job offer like it was written in a foreign language. You're giving me a chance to rebuild? I'm giving you a chance to prove you've learned from your mistakes. But Diane? I leaned forward, making sure she understood. This is your one opportunity. If you ever lie to me, steal from me, or try to manipulate my relationship with Tyler and Madison, you'll discover exactly how ruthless I can be. The woman who had spent 12 years making me feel like an outsider in my own family nodded with humble gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I don't deserve this kindness. You're right, I agreed. You don't. But Tyler and Madison deserve a mother who has the chance to become the person they need her to be. As Diane signed the contracts with shaking hands, I realized something had fundamentally changed inside me. I wasn't the uncertain girl who'd tried so hard to fit into their family dynamic. I wasn't even the grieving daughter who'd been excluded from her father's funeral. I was a woman who now held all the power, and I intended to use it wisely. The final month of our cohabitation was unlike anything I could have predicted. With her theft exposed and her future entirely dependent on my mercy, Diane transformed almost overnight. Gone was the subtle undermining and careful manipulation. Instead, she moved through the house with genuine humility, asking permission before changing anything, offering to help with household tasks she'd previously considered beneath her. Rebecca, she said one morning as I prepared for work, I've been thinking about what you said regarding Tyler's treatment. I know I've enabled his problems by always fixing them for him. I looked up from my coffee, surprised by her insight. That's a big realization. I've spent so many years trying to control everything, to make everything perfect for my children, that I never taught them to handle their own problems. She paused. The way I treated you. That was me trying to control Robert's relationship with you because I was threatened by how close you were. It was the closest thing to a genuine apology I'd ever received from her. Tyler's reaction to the mandatory counseling was predictably hostile at first. But when I explained that his gambling debts had cost Dad nearly $100,000 and contributed to his death, something shifted in him. I killed him? Tyler's voice was small, devastated. You didn't kill anyone, I said firmly. But your choices had consequences that affected the whole family. That's why you need to learn healthier ways to cope with stress and pressure. Madison was the easiest to help. Without Diane's constant anxiety and financial stress, she blossomed. I enrolled her in art classes she'd always wanted to take, helped her apply for a summer internship at an architecture firm, and watched her confidence grow daily. Rebecca, she said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner, I'm going to miss living here. I'll miss having you here too, I replied honestly. But you know you're always welcome to visit, right? This house has always been about family and your family. The changes in our dynamic didn't go unnoticed by the community. When I attended Tyler's basketball game, several of Dad's friends commented on how well I was handling everything. Your father would be proud, Mrs. Patterson told me. You've taken a terrible situation and somehow made it work for everyone. But the real test came when Diane started working at Mitchell Construction. I'd worried about the awkwardness of being her boss, but Diane approached the job with genuine professionalism. She was organized, detail-oriented, and had a natural ability to handle client communications that proved invaluable. You're actually good at this, I told her after she'd successfully resolved a complex scheduling conflict with 3 different contractors. I always wanted to work, she admitted. But Robert preferred me to focus on the children and household management. I forgot that I had skills beyond being a wife and mother. Watching Diane rediscover her professional capabilities was surprisingly satisfying. For the first time in our 12-year relationship, I was seeing her as an individual rather than just the woman who'd married my father. The business itself was thriving under my leadership. Word had spread that Mitchell Construction was now run by Robert's daughter, and several clients specifically requested meetings to discuss upcoming projects. People trust the Mitchell name, Jim Rodriguez explained. But they're also curious about you. You're bringing fresh ideas while maintaining your dad's reputation for quality. I'd implemented new marketing strategies, upgraded our equipment, and established partnerships with local suppliers that reduced costs significantly. The company was more profitable than it had been in years. But my proudest achievement was what I'd accomplished with Tyler. 3 weeks into his counseling, he approached me with something that looked like genuine remorse. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. I've been blaming you for Dad leaving me out of the will. But I think I know why he did it." I waited for him to continue. I wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. Hell, I can barely manage my own life. But you've turned everything around. The business, our family situation, even helping Mom become a real person again instead of just someone who lives through her kids. Tyler. No, let me finish. I was angry because I thought Dad didn't believe in me. But now I think he was protecting me and trusting you to take care of all of us until we could take care of ourselves. It was the most mature insight I'd ever heard from Tyler, and it gave me hope for his future. The night before Diane and the kids moved to their new house, we had one final family dinner in Dad's dining room. The conversation was relaxed, even warm, in a way that felt completely foreign to our previous interactions. "I have something to say," Diane announced as we finished dessert. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology that's 12 years overdue." Tyler and Madison looked surprised. They'd never heard their mother acknowledge wrongdoing so directly. "I was threatened by you from the moment I met you," Diane continued. "You were so clearly Robert's priority, and I was insecure about my place in his life. Instead of building a relationship with you, I spent years trying to diminish your importance to him." She took a shaky breath. "I taught my children that love was a competition instead of something that grows when you share it. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it." Madison reached over and squeezed my hand. Tyler nodded with newfound understanding, and I felt 12 years of resentment finally begin to dissolve. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, "and thank you for giving me the chance to know who you really are underneath all that fear." As we cleared the table together for the last time, I realized Dad's inheritance had given me something more valuable than money or property. It had given me the power to transform not just my own life, but the lives of everyone around me. Tomorrow, they would start their new chapter. And so would I. 6 months after Dad's death, I was running Mitchell Construction successfully, had transformed my relationship with my stepfamily, and was living comfortably in the house where I'd grown up. Everything should have been perfect. But I kept thinking about Dad's warning in the hospital. "Don't let them tell you." Tell me what? I'd uncovered Diane's theft, addressed the family dynamics, and secured everyone's future. What else was there? The answer came from an unexpected source. I was cleaning out the last of Dad's personal files when I found a letter addressed to me, hidden inside an old construction manual. The envelope was marked, "Open only if something happens to me." Inside was a single page in Dad's handwriting. "Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the chance to tell you everything in person. Diane's financial theft was only part of the problem. She's been working with someone else, someone who's been targeting our family for years. Check the storage unit on Miller Road, unit. The key is taped under my workbench. Be careful who you trust. Dad." A storage unit I didn't know existed. A conspiracy involving more than just Diane's desperation about Tyler's debts. I found the key exactly where Dad had said it would be. That afternoon, I drove to the Miller Road facility with my heart pounding. Unit contained boxes of documents dating back 15 years, financial records, photographs, private investigator reports that predated Morrison's work. As I opened the first box, I began to understand the scope of what Dad had discovered. Diane hadn't been working alone. Her sister Christine, who lived in California and rarely visited, had been the mastermind behind a sophisticated identity theft scheme targeting widowed men with substantial assets. The pattern was chilling in its consistency. Christine would identify wealthy widowers through online research, then orchestrate chance meetings between them and women she recruited as accomplices. These women would marry their targets, gain access to financial accounts, and systematically drain their assets while maintaining perfect facades as devoted wives. Dad wasn't their first victim, or their only current one. The files contained evidence of at least 6 other men who'd been targeted over the past decade. Some had died under suspicious circumstances. Others had been bankrupted and abandoned once their usefulness ended. My hands shook as I read Dad's notes. He'd been investigating this network for months after discovering Diane's theft, trying to understand how she'd learned such sophisticated financial manipulation techniques. The most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation between Diane and Christine from just weeks before Dad's death. "The old man is getting suspicious," Diane's voice said. He's been asking too many questions about the house refinancing. Then it's time to accelerate the timeline, Christine replied coldly. Remember what happened with the Phoenix job? We can't afford another exposure. What about Rebecca? She's always been a problem, and now she's asking questions about his will. Rebecca won't be an issue much longer. Once the inheritance goes through probate, we'll contest it. I've already got the grounds prepared. Claims of undue influence, questions about his mental capacity in his final months. My blood turned to ice. They'd been planning to steal Dad's entire estate, using his death as an opportunity to eliminate me from the family permanently. But there was more. Dad had also discovered that Tyler's gambling debts weren't random misfortune. They'd been orchestrated. Christine had arranged for Tyler to be targeted by professional gamblers who deliberately encouraged his addiction and inflated his debts to create a financial crisis Diane could exploit. Tyler had been victimized just as much as Dad, maybe more. I sat in that storage unit for hours, reading through evidence of a crime network that had destroyed families across 3 states. Dad had been building a case to bring them all down, but he'd died before he could act on it. Now that responsibility fell to me. But first, I needed to know if Diane was still actively involved in the scheme or if her transformation over the past months had been genuine. That evening, I called Morrison and arranged an emergency meeting. When I showed him Dad's hidden evidence, his expression grew grim. "This is much bigger than what I uncovered," he said. "Your father was building a federal case. This kind of organized fraud crosses state lines, involves multiple victims. The FBI would be very interested in this information. What about Diane? Do you think she's still working with her sister?" Morrison pulled out his phone. "Let me make some calls. I've got contacts who can check recent communications, travel records, financial activity." 2 hours later, he had answers that changed everything. "Diane's been clean since your father's death," he reported. "No contact with Christine, no suspicious financial activity, no attempts to access accounts she shouldn't. Either she's the most careful criminal I've ever seen, or she's genuinely reformed. And Christine? Still active. She's currently working a target in Denver, a retired engineer who lost his wife last year. Based on the timeline, she's probably 6 months into the relationship. I thought about Madison's art classes, Tyler's progress in counseling, Diane's genuine remorse and hard work at the company. Had their transformation been real? Or was I being manipulated on a level even more sophisticated than I'd imagined? There was only one way to find out. The next morning, I walked into Mitchell Construction and asked Diane to join me in my office. I closed the door and placed a copy of the storage unit files on my desk. "I need you to tell me about your sister, Christine," I said quietly. Diane's face went white. She sank into the chair across from my desk, her hands trembling. "How much do you know?" she whispered. "Everything. The question is whether you're still involved in her schemes, or if you've truly changed like I thought you had." For a long moment, Diane stared at the files with an expression of absolute terror. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "Christine is why I did it all," she said. "She had information about my first marriage, about things I'd done before I met Robert. She blackmailed me into helping her." "What kind of information?" Diane's voice dropped to barely audible. "When Tyler's father left us, I was desperate. Christine convinced me to help her with one of her schemes. Just once, she said, to get back on my feet. I was young and stupid and terrified of being homeless with 2 small children. The confession poured out of her, like poison finally being expelled from her system. Christine had used Diane's one moment of desperation to control her for years, threatening to expose her past and destroy her marriage to Dad if she didn't cooperate. "Every dollar I took from Robert, Christine took half," Diane continued. "She said it was payment for keeping my secrets. But after Robert died, after I saw what I'd become, I cut all contact with her. I changed my phone number, blocked her emails, everything. She doesn't know about our arrangement? About you working here? No. As far as Christine knows, I'm still grieving and struggling financially. I haven't told her anything about how you've helped us rebuild." I studied Diane's face carefully, looking for signs of deception. Instead, I saw exhaustion, relief, and something that looked like hope. "Diane, I'm going to ask you to do something that might be dangerous, and you have every right to say no." She straightened in her chair. "What do you need?" "I need you to help me bring down your sister's entire operation. And that means pretending to be the person you used to be just long enough to gather evidence." Diane didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes. Christine has destroyed enough families. It's time for it to end." And with that decision, our partnership became something neither of us had ever expected. A collaboration to deliver the justice Dad had been working toward when he died. The plan Morrison and I developed was risky but elegant. Diane would reestablish contact with Christine, claiming financial desperation and begging to be included in her sister's current scheme. We'd document everything, then turn the evidence over to federal investigators. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked Diane as we prepared for her first phone call to Christine in months. Once we start, there's no going back. Rebecca, my sister has been destroying families for years. She used my children as leverage to force me into betraying the man I loved. It's time for her to face consequences. The phone call was scheduled for that evening. Morrison had arranged for recording equipment, and federal agents were standing by to monitor the conversation. When Diane dialed Christine's number, her hands were steady. The woman who answered was clearly surprised to hear from her. Diane? Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for months. I've been struggling, Christine. The inheritance didn't work out like we planned. Rebecca got everything, and I'm barely surviving. I listened as Diane masterfully played the role of the desperate woman she used to be. She begged Christine for another chance, claimed she needed money urgently, and expressed willingness to relocate to help with the Denver operation. Christine's response revealed the true scope of her criminal network. I've got 3 active situations right now, she said. Denver is almost ready for harvest, but I could use help with the Phoenix restart and the new opportunity in Portland. Can you travel? Yes, anything. I need this to work, Christine. Good. But Diane? This time, you follow my instructions exactly. Your emotional attachment to that construction worker nearly ruined everything. These men are marks, not love interests. The casual cruelty in Christine's voice made my stomach turn. Dad had been nothing more than a target to her, a means to an end in a game she'd played dozens of times. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane fed Christine carefully crafted information while federal investigators built their case. We learned about bank accounts in multiple states, false identities, and a network of women Christine had recruited to target vulnerable widowers. The breakthrough came when Christine sent Diane detailed instructions for accessing the Denver target's financial accounts. The electronic trail of these communications provided exactly the evidence federal prosecutors needed. We've got enough for multiple federal charges, Agent Martinez told us during our final briefing. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy. Christine and her accomplices are looking at serious prison time. What about Diane? I asked. She was a victim too, in many ways. Ms. Mitchell's cooperation has been invaluable. Given that she was coerced into participation and has provided full assistance with our investigation, we're recommending immunity in exchange for her testimony. The raids happened simultaneously across 3 states. Christine was arrested in Denver, along with 2 accomplices. Bank accounts were frozen, victims were identified, and a criminal network that had operated for over a decade was finally dismantled. Tyler and Madison learned about their aunt's arrest through news reports. Their reactions revealed how much they'd both grown over the past year. I can't believe Aunt Christine was using us, Madison said, her voice a mixture of sadness and anger. She knew about Tyler's gambling problems and made them worse on purpose. Tyler's response was more complex. I keep thinking about all the ways this could have gone differently. If Dad hadn't been so smart about protecting Rebecca, if Rebecca hadn't been strong enough to help us instead of destroying us, we could have lost everything. 3 months later, I stood in the cemetery where Dad was buried, carrying fresh flowers and a newspaper clipping about Christine's conviction. She'd been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. We got them, Dad, I said quietly, placing the flowers on his grave. All of them. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been the excluded daughter at her father's funeral. Now I was a successful business owner, had rebuilt my relationship with my stepfamily, and had helped bring down a criminal network that had victimized dozens of families. But more than that, I'd discovered who I really was when given the power to choose my own path. Diane approached from across the cemetery carrying her own flowers. We'd developed an unexpected friendship built on shared experience and mutual respect. How are you feeling? She asked, joining me beside Dad's headstone. Proud, I said. I think Dad would be proud too. He would be. You took an impossible situation and somehow made it work for everyone. She paused. I've been thinking about what he was trying to tell you in the hospital. Don't let them tell you. What do you think he meant? Don't let them tell you that you don't belong. Don't let them tell you that you're not strong enough. Don't let them tell you who you are. Diane smiled. You've spent your whole life proving those people wrong. As we walked back to our cars together, I reflected on the unexpected gift Dad's inheritance had given me. Not just financial security or property ownership, but the power to redefine my relationships on my own terms. Tyler was thriving in college, his gambling addiction under control, and his relationship with me stronger than it had ever been. Madison had been accepted to her dream art school with scholarship money I'd helped her apply for. Diane had become not just an employee, but a trusted partner in growing Dad's business. We weren't the perfect blended family Dad had always hoped for. We were something better. People who'd chosen to care about each other despite our complicated history. That evening, I sat in Dad's old study, my study now, reviewing contracts for Mitchell Construction's latest project. The business was thriving, my family relationships were healthy, and I'd found my place in the world Dad had wanted me to have. My phone rang with a call from a potential new client. As I answered with my professional greeting, I smiled at how different my voice sounded now. Confident, authoritative, completely secure in my own worth. Mitchell Construction. This is Rebecca Mitchell speaking. How can I help you? If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's written in a will, it's the courage to write your own ending. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and you deserve relationships that celebrate your worth rather than diminish it. Thank you for following Rebecca's journey with me, and I'll see you in the next story. I'm Emma, and I'm 27 years old. You don't belong in this family, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the birthday party chatter like a knife. 20